is here. We've got, I accidentally clicked on something. Our website is here. This is our homepage. This is the best spot for you to find information about the project and frequently asked questions, contact information for getting in touch with us. So thanks again. And with that, I'm just going to pass the meeting off to Valerie to get started.
Thank you. Hello. Welcome, everyone. I just want to introduce Scott's getting on right now. He works in my office, and he'll be working. He's working with me in terms of developing the maps and a lot of the inventory analysis. And so I brought him here tonight if there's any questions when we go through the land use stuff in terms of how we collected the data and the assessment of the data, and I would be happy to turn it over to him. So why don't I get started? I have another little PowerPoint presentation. It won't take long. We have a lot to get through tonight. But I wanted to give you a little bit of an assessment of what we're finding on land uses. So let me just get started on that. Oh, sorry, I have too many things open. Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay. All right. All right. So just again, I like to just kind of run through the schedule. We are now in November. We are working on the existing conditions analysis. The black dots were comprehensive plan steering committee meetings. Clearly, we had a few more than that. We are still anticipating having a draft report to you at the end of December. So that is still moving forward. And we've also been meeting with all the different town committees, land use boards. We do have a meeting with the Zoning Board of Appeals in December. And we're still waiting for one more meeting with the Housing Committee. We had a meeting scheduled and they had to reschedule the meeting. So I'm hoping to get that wrapped up sometime in December as well. But other than that, all the other boards and committees have been reached out to. And I have one more follow-up. I think it's with the antenna committee. So I think other than that, we have accomplished or at least made contact with all the different boards and committees. And that also includes the fire department, the school district, the ambulance corps, the police departments as well. And I am planning I have meeting notes for each of the committees that we've met with, or if they've provided me additional information, and I'll be starting to upload that onto Google Docs. I was just waiting to get the last of the final committees reports, and then I will, again, upload that for you to review and take a look at. Okay. All right, so just again, for you as well as the public, the plan topics are going to include all these various environmental topics. A couple of things that I wanted to just sort of walk through tonight with this committee, as well as the just the general public, is actually a little bit on the comprehensive plan, examples of comprehensive plan recommendations. Because there have been a number of, in meeting with a lot of the committees, there's been a number of questions that have been asked in terms of, will the inventory analysis provide like a detailed open space plan, or will the comprehensive plan identify, very specific properties that need to be preserved, or will the comprehensive plan provide very detailed like policies or legislation? And so one of the things that I wanted to just kind of walk through or give examples of what the comprehensive plan will provide, what the inventory analysis will provide, and what it won't provide, but what it will do. So for example, the comprehensive plan will identify other studies that may need to be taken. And these studies would include, like, for example, a parks and recreation plan or an open space plan. So if something does come up through the inventory analysis and also the public feedback where more information is needed because not enough is able to make a concrete assessment, or the town is just doesn't have the information in which to be able to really look at potential issues or concerns for that particular area, other studies will be identified. Also, more in-depth analyses will also be identified. So, for example, if for some reason, like, there are some lakes that maybe we have water quality analysis done on some lakes, but not other lakes, the recommendation might be to undertake more water quality analysis. Or there might be a recommendation to take a traffic analysis if for some reason a particular intersection is something that comes up over and over again as problematic. Another thing that the comprehensive plan will do is recommend certain legislation or policies. So, for example, the inventory analysis might identify certain regulations or laws that the town did not adopt. And we might hear throughout the comprehensive plan process from the public that these are policies or laws that they want to see adopted. Then a recommendation might be for the town to actually adopt some additional regulations or new local laws. And then the last will be identification of projects. So the comprehensive plan itself will identify potential upgrades or other capital projects that might be needed. It won't necessarily provide like what the exact costs are unless for some reason we already know that, or it won't necessarily provide like detailed engineering documents or construction documents or even like full scopes, but it will identify potentially like upgrades are needed, or we heard from this department head that, this type of vehicle is needed, or for example, if there are other projects that kind of come out from the public, we might say that the town might want to consider undertaking a particular capital project. So that's just kind of, I just wanted to give, the committee as well as the broader public just sort of a sense of what the comprehensive plan recommendations will sort of, follow, how they will sort of unfold, as well as what to expect in terms of, the depth and details of a comprehensive plan. Are there any questions on that before I move on? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about land use. So I have, let me just, I actually have a couple maps I also want to bring up as well. Okay. So can everyone see the table that I have? Okay. So this is the land use. Land use is broken down into a number of different categories. They're all based upon tax code assessments. So basically, just to start off with, Lewisboro, the single most largest land use in the town of Lewisboro is single family residential, which basically encompasses 57.4% of your total acreage. The second most is the wild forested conservation lands, public parks, and preserves. That makes up about 16.2% of the acres in the town of Lewisboro. And the third is actually vacant land, and that comes up to 13% of total acres, which is about 804 acres. Now, I want to just show, I don't know, did my screen change to a map? You can see the map. Okay, perfect. All right. So this is a map of the land uses in the town of Lewisboro. Now, I'm not expecting you to read everything, but basically, I just want to sort of highlight all the yellow is residential. The orange, which you see a little bit down here in sporadic, those are what we call multifamily residential. So they could be anywhere from 3 or more units. The darker red is your commercial uses. And as you can see, they're primarily in a couple different areas. They're primarily in Golden's Bridge, also Cross River, as well as Vista. And then there's a few sporadically throughout like the Route 35 corridor. And then the blue is what we consider your community facilities. So they could be some of your, when I'm going to say your parks, what I mean is like your town parks, ones that have like actual recreational facilities on them, as opposed to your preserves. It also includes town offices, and also other cultural facilities, such as like churches and the like. And also the school district properties, anything that's really related to more of a cultural function. So the other thing that I want to also point out is all the green. The green is all your wild forested conserved lands that include public parks and also preserves. So these aren't necessarily the darker green here. That's your private recreation, right? So that's something that's not necessarily inherently, already conserved basically in perpetuity. That could potentially change or get redeveloped at some point, but the lighter green is ones that are designated as conserved or parklands.
Valerie, is the vacant land, does that include watershed property and New York City DEP property?
So some of the DEP property is preserved, and that's what's identified on that. Vacant land is actually vacant land. It's identified as a tax assessment, which is usually land that is available for development. It doesn't have any other sort of conservation or other, easements associated with it or designations that wouldn't allow for it to be redeveloped.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so I'm not sure is it private or is it public?
So
The ownership.
Right, DEP would go as like conserved lands for the most part. It's not a public park, but it's not private recreation.
But vacant land. That's
But vacant land is typically it's private land.
okay.
I mean, there is the possibility that you could have, let's just say an organization could own it, but they don't have, it's not conserved land. I mean, that's always a possibility, but for the most part, it is private land that is able to be developed at some point in time.
Okay.
Like Four Winds.
For
What
winds,
would that be
but that's
under?
not vacant land, is it?
No, that's not vacant land.
That you have that as fully
Yes,
developed?
that would probably, I believe, Four Winds, and we have to check, but I think it's one of the cultural services or community services. But I have to just check because usually the hospitals or those types of facilities go into community services.
Mhm.
And Scott, are you there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Four Winds it would be under the blue community services and facilities.
Okay.
So I'm having the same questions about vacant land that everybody else does, I think, because it seems like a bigger number than
Yeah.
I would inherently expect. So
Yeah.
let's just say if somebody has a 8-acre parcel of land in 2-acre zoning, do you count 6 of those acres as vacant, or is this truly a parcel that is vacant, no building upon it?
So Scott, did you want to take that or do you want me to take that?
So the way the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance, assigns properties, these property codes, there's different types of vacant land. There's a whole group. It's any number with a 300, and then there's usually varying 300 through the 300 range. So I would say, from my looking at the initial numbers, a lot of these were residential vacant land is one of the classifications. So that's usually just vacant land that is maybe in a residential area. But yeah, I think the nature of most of these there's no buildings, or if there once were, they've been removed. There's usually no improvements, no roads, anything like that. So for the most part, they're truly vacant.
Yeah. So to answer your question, if for some reason you had 8 acres, right, and you have a house on those 8 acres, but you live in an 2-acre minimum, and you could technically subdivide, that's not considered vacant land. But if I had 8 acres and I have nothing on that site, that is considered vacant land.
Or
Okay, and if I split my parcel, I went in and had a lot line change, and I ended up with 2 parcels, one of which has a house on it, the other would be vacant. Okay,
That's correct.
it's surprising to me, and I think that's a very interesting number. We keep on sort of being, at least the the sense I got was that we're built out a lot. And this is just a very interesting number. Thanks.
You're welcome. So to also answer your other question about DEP land, so DEP land's a little bit tricky because we found that New York City DEP actually owns like a number of different properties, and some of them are under different entities. And so some of them like kind of fall under, if you see the gray, some might fall under like public utilities lands, right? And other ones will fall under conservation lands. And I really think it depends on when the DEP acquire those lands and under what program and under how they're being assessed through the tax assessor.
Okay, this was one of the, when I was looking at the agenda before the meeting, this was one of the questions that I had too. So I'm glad we're spending some time on it. But it seems like a lot of those, I don't know which parcels are which, but my expectation is that there are probably some constraints to development on some of those parcels, whether it's wetlands or ownership or other, for the gray vacant land parcels.
Right, so the dark gray are like utilities. The lighter gray, you know, as you can see in here, are like the vacant lands. And yes, there would be, so if any of these lands were to come before like your land use boards, they would have to go through the same process as anybody that's looking to develop like a single family home. You know, would you know, are there wetlands, are there steep slopes, you know, where would those, where would certain areas be protected? But technically you do have the ability for more development to take place based upon, you know, what we see in the vacant lands.
The vacant lands. And then also, just to add on that, I think with the point that Jan Anderson was driving towards is, I see a lot of large light yellow parcels on the map, which would be family residential. And those are probably all underdeveloped properties, the larger ones, where they can be subdivided potentially, and additional density can be added in different areas.
Yeah, so I mean, not to change subjects, but let me pull up the zoning map too, because since we're talking about this, because this would be helpful. So you actually have a lot of the area, like this whole area here is all R4A, which is 4-acre zoning. So if you look at some of the area where that 4-acre zoning is, yes, there are larger parcels. There probably are some that are subdividable, but you are looking at 4-acre zoning. So to a larger extent, there are going to be a number of properties that may be actually undersized at this point, especially around the lake community areas. You know, and then you look up around this area, this is all 2-acre zoning. And again, you can see a lot of that probably, I mean, there are probably definitely some that it could be subdividable, but not, you know, you're not seeing like properties of this size under like half-acre zoning. And that area is also 4-acre zoning as well, that I was just showing you. Okay. So let me I'll get back to just sort of highlighting a few other things. So with residential land uses, we wanted to highlight here that for the most part, basically the percent of total area is 99.4% is single family homes. You have about a little less than, you know, about 0.5% for 2-family residential, less than 0.1% for 3-family, and then multifamily is 0.03%.
So Valerie, I went back and looked at the prior presentation you gave us that talked about the number of units that were in the various categories. And I was trying to compare them to this, and I had trouble. Would that be, I don't really know, and that or the prior page, you know, where something like 79% was single family homes.
Yeah.
And yet that was, I think, a smaller percent of the population than, you know, I was trying to look at units or use, you know, how we do expect some density in some of these, but I was trying to figure out if we really do have a lot of areas where there's a lot of density on a fairly small amount of land. Again, that's not, as I walk and drive around the town, I don't see that much. And yet it feels like it must be. I don't know if there's a way to tie last month's or 2 months ago presentation with this one to poke at that a little bit.
So I think there are two different types of data sets to a larger extent, because last month was really looking at your overall housing and what's being developed, right? Versus this is really, you know, your tax parcels. So one particular tax parcel could contain a number of different dwelling units, right? So that's where your multifamily, you know, so you probably will have, you're going to clearly have more dense population within the multifamily areas. However, when we looked at the hamlets themselves, and if you saw at last month's presentation, a lot of the hamlet areas actually are not that dense in terms of, even though some of them might have a couple multifamily developments, in comparison to the whole entire hamlet area, you're still seeing that density sort of spread out throughout the hamlet area. That's the same thing with what you'll find with this as well. Because when we did break it down to individual hamlet areas in terms of land uses, and that's in the report itself. And we actually look at some of this stuff. What you'll find is, like, for example, when you look at Golden's Bridge, right? And some of this was very surprising to me as well. So Golden's Bridge, 55.5% of the Golden's Bridge hamlet area is a single family residential, but its second highest land use category is actually vacant land with 17.1%. So while you might have some a little bit more of, like, I'm going to say, denser types of development in certain areas of Golden's Bridge, you still have a decent amount of, like, vacant land, so that it does give that characteristic of, you know, that same sort of sense as you drive through the rest of Lewisboro. And the third highest land category in Golden's Bridge is actually wild, forested, and conserved lands. So you do have this in a lot of the hamlets. While you do have a number of single family or residential uses, you also have those other uses that kind of provide that other more rural feel to the hamlet area. In terms of multifamily residential, you know, in Golden's Bridge, you're only looking at, what we came up with was about 15.4 acres, or a total of 0.38% of its total land area. And actually, Golden's Bridge has the highest amount of vacant land out of all 6 hamlets. So I thought that was also very interesting as well. In terms of Cross River, again, the highest amount for Cross River is actually its wild forested land, and that's mostly because of, as you can imagine, Ward Pound Bridge. In terms of the second highest land use, it's single family, which is at 24.8. And then community services and cultural facilities is actually at 9.1%. And that's mostly because of the school districts, school properties. Another thing of note with Cross River, they do have 7.1% is public utilities. On another note for Walkabuck, again, Walkabuck, its number one land use is single family residential at 72.1%. Its second is wild forested to conserved lands at approximately 8%. And then the third highest is private recreation, which is, as you can imagine, is the Walkabuck Country Club at 8%. In with South Salem, again, we're looking at 64.6% is single family. The second highest is actually vacant land at 15%. And then the third is your conserved land, which is at about approximately 10%. And then the Lewisboro hamlet area, we have in there, we have about 59% is single family residential. The second highest is vacant land at about 13%. And then the wild forested and conserved lands, like which includes your public parks, is about 13%. Of note that Lewisboro has about like 7% of agricultural land, which is one of the higher of the hamlet areas in terms of agricultural lands as well. And then finally, we have Vista, and Vista actually is 71% single family land uses. 14% is 14% is vacant land, so that's your second highest, and the third highest is actually private recreation. However, I want to just note the multi-family residential, you don't necessarily, there's in that particular area, it's mostly, you know, while it's still like it's the townhomes and stuff, you don't really have like your multi-family per se in that area.
So did I hear you correctly that even though the percentage of vacant land varies a little bit from hamlet to hamlet, the variation, it sounded like it's actually pretty small? It was between 17 and 13. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think Wacabuck has the least amount of vacant land available, and that was at 7%.
Okay.
And I think that's mostly because that area has been developed over time with mostly single family homes.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
So I'm going to finish running through this because I know we have to get on other things. Also in terms of hamlet planning area sizes and parcel counts, we also wanted to give you this a little bit of, you know, background. So the way, and again, these are the hamlet planning areas. And so for the most part, the Golden's Bridge and South Salem are the largest of the hamlet planning areas that were defined, and Cross River, Wacabuck, and the Lewisboro hamlets are approximately, you know, with 2,000 acres, and then Vista was the smallest at 1,500 acres. But you can see in terms of like acreage, like for example, with Cross River versus number of tax parcels, I mean, a lot of that has to do with like Ward Pound Ridge, but you
And the
know,
reservoir. Yeah.
exactly. All right, so a couple other things I wanted to bring up to you. So one of the things that we were looking at are what we call opportunity sites, right? Are there any properties that have been brought to our attention that could potentially be redevelopment? Not necessarily saying what the redevelopment is, but it's ones that if for some reason the town wanted to look at redeveloping for particular uses at some point in time, are there some properties available? One is actually owned by the town of Lewisboro. This property here is actually, they call it the, just make sure I have it. It's on Fairmount Road, and it's about a 7-acre proper parcel. Now, again, like anybody that were, if the town were to consider disposing of this land or selling it off for redevelopment, there are a lot of things that would have to be, you know, looked at in terms of the environmental resources and stuff. But this is one piece of property that was identified as a potential for an opportunity area or redevelopment area within the town. The other 3 parcels that I'm going to go through were identified by the New York City DEP. This is also excess lands that they own, that they have acknowledged that they could potentially consider selling to the town or somebody to redevelop. And again, this would be also be somewhere, like this would be in coordination with the town. So I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but these are again, are potential opportunity sites that New York City DEP provided me information on and said, you know, that these are properties that they have identified as excess lands. All three of them are located in the Golden's Bridge area. The first one is about 23 acres. The second one is about 31 acres of land. And then the third one is about 26 acres of land. And as you can see, they're all, you know, close to Route 22, near the highway, and within the Golden's Bridge area. So the report itself is just going to acknowledge that these properties exist, that there's a potential, but it does not necessarily say what that potential is. If something throughout the process, you know, identifies a particular need within the community and something that the public wants to see, maybe one of those properties could be identified for that particular, you know, use. But at this point, we're just acknowledging that these properties are technically potentially available for redevelopment.
So they all are part of the vacant land that's considered in each one of the numbers that you gave before.
Yes, they would most likely be part of the vacant land, and we can double check on that as well, but yes.
When you say their potential for redevelopment, or
Yeah.
in this case, development, because they haven't
Yes,
built
yes, you're right. That's correct.
with the standard being that they're owned by the town, but are we making any representation, or has there been any thought given to whether they are developable, namely with respect to wetlands, steep slopes, vernal pools, and so forth?
Nope, that would be like your next step in any sort of development process. This was just lands that now clearly, if New York City DEP has identified them, I'm going to, you know, again, I can't make any, you know, I don't know for sure, but these are lands that they felt that they didn't necessarily need in order for their watershed protection, right? So lands that they find that are very valuable in terms of watershed protection, they usually would not offer those up as excess lands. That being said, there are probably still environmental, you know, constraints on those sites, and those would have to be taken into consideration, along with your other issues like traffic, you know, in terms of site access, emergency vehicles, and, you know, and the like.
Gotcha. But generally speaking, it's upland, it's not wetland, probably.
So, yeah, they actually provided in this map, these are maps that were provided by New York City DEP, and they actually have any MWI wetlands identified, and there are no wetlands identified on those sites.
Is anyone, I had already asked Valerie this, but is anyone aware of what the distance in the contour lines might be on this map? Is there a standard? You know, like, does this represent a 10-foot rise, or 20 or 30? I was just wondering about the steepness of the land as far as use.
Yeah, I don't know.
Does
That would
anybody
have
know
to.
this? Yeah, I knew you did, but I didn't know. Does anybody else know? No, huh? Okay.
But
You can
again, that would have
probably-
to be looked at as part of any sort of review process.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can probably look at some parcel mapping and find out. To me, I mean, that just, the one we're looking at right now looks like it has water going through it, but you know, it just by the contours, but I don't know.
That's down below, but down up here, I was just curious whether it's.
Yeah, I mean,
actually-
there's clearly a stream that goes through it.
It's right, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay.
Okay, so in terms of zoning districts, again, we just wanted to sort of highlight. So for the most part, your zoning is primarily single-family zoning. The percentages that we calculated are shown here, and in general, 84.7% of all your zoning districts account for 1 acre or higher minimum zoning. 7.9%, 84% was 2 acres or higher, so 2 or 4 acre zoning, and 7.9% is 1 acre zoning. And then 1.6% of your total zoning districts or your total area that's zoned is zoned non-residential. And that corresponds with, the zoning map that you see here.
It looks like there's a difference of about 2,000 acres between when you broke down the towns and this map, it was 16 versus 18.
Yeah, so sometimes that happens in terms of GIS. And so they're not going to be exact. And a lot of that has to do with the way the data is calculated. And Scott, if you wanted to touch upon that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think in this specific instance, the land over by the Muscoot Reservoir, that is actually not within a taxable parcel over in Golden's Bridge. So when you take the zoning and you calculate just sort of the area it overlays, that's that calculation. So anything that doesn't fall within a parcel isn't going to show up in the land use totals. So you also have a couple, there's small reservoirs down in Vista that are actually part of the Connecticut water supply. Those don't fall within tax parcel. So that, that area is included within the zoning district, but it's not included within our land use calculations because there's no, it goes by parcels.
Any other questions on that?
And just quickly, I think right now there is a law that allows ADUs or additional dwelling units on even
correct.
single family parcels, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And we do talk about the ADUs in the housing section and the ability to have those ADUs. And we do have the number of ADUs that you have within the town, and those would be accounted for in your overall land use based upon how they're being taxed. So if they're being taxed as like 1+, or a 2-family, then those would get reflected there. If they're not being taxed that way, then, we do recognize and acknowledge them in the housing section, but how they're being taxed is how they would be reflected on the land use maps.
That's great. Okay, so there could be 2 families occupying something that is called a single family residence because of the way the ADU is classified and taxed.
Yes, and Scott, do you remember if you came across any of that data?
No, because I don't think there's no property tax code for a single family home with an ADU on it. I think that would be something more of a town level might have information on, but for the land use codes, it would probably just be a single family residential.
Right,
So
and if I recall, and I have to take a look at the data again, but if I recall, I believe it was somewhere on the order of like maybe 100 properties. It could be a little bit less, but it wasn't much more than that.
If I remember the email traffic correctly, it's that at some point there was a list, but it's not being maintained. And so that number of 100 or whatever that you just mentioned is definitely not currently accurate because the town isn't actively tracking them because they're not taxing them differently.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so that brings us to the end of our presentation for tonight. Are there any questions on the information that we provided you this evening? Okay. All right.
Not a question, but just want to come in before we switch topics and say, as a reminder, just on process for everyone, that this report that we just heard, combined with the other reports we've heard in previous meetings, is all gonna combine together to be the inventory, basically like where Lewisboro is now. So, like any process, we need to dig into where we are now before we solicit input on where we want to go. So I think it's really great that we have this and it's so detailed. So thank you to Valerie and your team for all the work that you've been
Yeah,
doing.
you'll wait until you get this report.
Yeah, and to the unsung heroes behind the scenes, I know that Kirsten and our tax assessor
Yes.
put in a lot of work on culling through the data and helping you guys get what you needed. So thank you to the town and to our people and to your team, and great
Right,
work
and-
all around.
Thank you. And we are finishing up a lot of the maps. And so one of the things that we'd like to do, if it's all right with you, because I know I know that once we send you the report, everyone's going to have a chance to review the report and the data, but I am going to send out the parks and open space maps to Nicole, if that's all right, ahead of time, just to make sure that we have the accuracy there. And then also we're working on an historic, basically historic district and historic buildings map. And I'd like to send that over to Maureen ahead of time as well. So that way she can review that and also catch anything or inaccuracies, so that we can make sure that when you get the maps, they're as accurate as possible. Okay.
That sounds great.
Okay, great. I think the other maps, the hamlet areas you've already seen, and the land uses, as you know, we definitely worked with the tax assessor. So that's all coordinated with exactly the tax assessment parcels. And then a lot of the other maps are being pulled directly from like GIS data in terms of state data. So you'll see a lot of that. And so that we feel fairly confident in terms of the accuracy of those maps.
Mm-hmm. For the group on the call, does anybody see any reason why did we miss any eyes on this? Or, I mean, I know we've worked really hard along the way to get everybody involved, but did we miss anything? I see no's and silence. That's great. Yeah,
Okay.
we've been careful.
And then one other thing is I'm going to send to Kirsten the community facilities map so that she can just make sure that we have those community facilities identified correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sure she'll loop in the right people on that as well.
Great, excellent. All right, so I think the next thing on our agenda, we're going right into the discussion of the public participation survey results, and then the first public meeting format, and then the upcoming survey. So Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the public participation results.
Sure, and I'll be super quick on this. I just want to scroll through some of the results visually and thank everybody who participated in our survey. We had, let's see. The numbers here are a little skewed because some people skipped certain questions, but we had almost 500 total responses in terms of all the different ways, the paper, the online. Yeah, so we're really happy with the response. 130 people volunteered to help. And then in terms of types of meetings, we got really good data. Virtual, 292 people responded that they wanted virtual, and 99 responded in person, 169 no preference. Just digging into the in-person a little bit more, there were actually only 29 people that checked the in-person meeting box alone. 70 of them checked in-person and virtual as options they'd be comfortable with. And then jumping to the next question, just thinking about the people that wanted in-person meetings, 26 of them answered Saturday morning, and then going down in order from that, Sunday afternoon. If we just look at the general, everybody who responded, weekday evenings were the most popular option, weekday afternoons, and then Saturday morning as the third. And then we did some slicing and dicing there. Of the 133 respondents who responded weekday afternoons, 71 also said weekday evening. So there's some overlap there. And again, I'm going through this quickly, but when we come back to, the decisions about the meeting format, we can circle back to any of this. Advanced copies of the slides is a very popular option. 68% of respondents said that they wanted that, so we hear that loud and clear. Also, just thinking about accessibility and figuring out if virtual meetings are able to address some of the accessibility requests and requirements. So 13 out of 17 people who checked large print also checked virtual. And then 17 out of 24 who checked closed captioning also checked virtual. So on and so forth. So just, we'll come back to this later, but virtual is a really great option in terms of helping people attend and have these accessibility needs met. And then we've got some childcare requests. We have outreach teams for Chinese and Spanish languages. We had one person request ASL interpreter. So we're getting really good information about the kind of accessibility features that we want our meetings to have. And information about town events. Got some good data here, but this also reflects some of how this information was collected, that the town clerk email list and the Parks and Recreation email lists were very popular responses, but those were also really effective ways of getting people to respond to the survey. Yeah, and I think that's all I want to highlight for now. We can always come back to this as we're discussing the format for the meetings. Are there any questions about that? Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Valerie, and you can keep us moving.
All right. So I think we, I know you had in another committee meeting where you were talking about the different options. And I think the decision was that we're going to do 1 in person and 2 virtuals. So similar to, Katie and I were emailing back and forth, and we both came to the same conclusion that we think the in-person should be on a Saturday, and then the 2 virtuals will be weekday evenings. I'd like to, if possible, have the Saturday event take place first, and then have the virtual events take place after the Saturday event. And the reason being is that because it's the first event, you might get more people interested and to come. So if the first event is the virtual event, they'll, my concern is that we're going to have to have people register for the virtual event just so that we can make sure that we have the numbers and also the people there to facilitate the breakout rooms, and that we are able to have it as much of a dialogue as possible. And so that it's very interactive as opposed to me lecturing to people over Zoom. So the Saturday event, though, would be something that would be open for a few hours. And then we would have, basically it's a workshop. So people would be able to come in as they please, stay as long as they please, and then leave whenever they're completed. So this also allows for people to just kind of come when they want to in their throughout the day, and it's flexible. Where the virtual meeting will be, we're going to start at a certain time and we'll end the meeting at a certain time, and it's going to be a little bit different. The in-person meeting, what we were anticipating doing, and let me just, I can share my screen.
And can I just pause you for 1 second while you're doing that? So just backing up a little bit, and to fill the public in. So we analyzed the results of the survey behind the scenes, and then had a discussion as the steering committee as to what the best avenues would be for what is technically meeting number 1 of 9. And we thought it was a good idea to break the meeting into 3 pieces so that there were more calendar dates for people to participate, since one date doesn't always work for everyone. And we also divided it up into 2 virtual. That way we can keep the breakout rooms small and it can be interactive, as Valerie was just saying. And then even though the survey was very much in favor of virtual, we wanted to also have a public in-person meeting option for meeting number 1 available. That way we could just make every option available, have people participate in the way that felt most comfortable to them. And, it's meeting number 1. It's super important that we get as many people as involved up front as possible, and that it feels engaging and interactive, and it gets people excited about participating in not just the first meeting, but the rest of the process. So that's how we came to the conclusion of where we're at now. And I'll kick it back to you, Valerie, to just keep talking about the details. But I just
Yeah,
wanted to
absolutely.
make sure we talked about the why a little bit.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Katie. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, there will be a difference between the in-person workshop and the virtual meetings. And I want to talk a little bit about our thoughts on this and then get feedback from the committee, right? So this is just initial thoughts. We're looking for feedback. So first, the in-person workshop itself. So we like to have, typically on an in-person workshop, we like to have one station, which we call existing conditions. So the map you saw today, we will have other maps so that people can get a very good sense of where they are, what their town is really showing in terms of information and data. And then they go on to the second station, which is really what we call our strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. And so there we will have basically we typically have like boards up and people can write on Post-it notes, like their thoughts about the various aspects of the town of Lewisboro, anything that they feel like. When we call strengths, what do you like about Lewisboro? What are things that you find that, Lewisboro could do better? What are things that, that you would want to see in terms of, changes in Lewisboro? Or what are things that you find that if Lewisboro continues going in a particular direction, if it doesn't change, that could potentially become a problem down the line? So it really just kind of is wide open. It can be any topic or any concepts or ideas, and it's just a good way of getting feedback from the community. And it's also done in a way that the community can just go in and provide their feedback, and there's not this, there's not this like large dialogue. It's just really an individual can go through the different stations and provide their individual feedback. Then there's also station for a vision statement. Again, we like to keep it open and see what people come up with and what do they consider should be the vision for the town of Lewisboro. And then from there, once we get all that feedback, we'll come up with a vision statement for the comprehensive plan. And then that draft vision statement will go to the second public workshop where we can get feedback from the public, or it could also be part of a public survey as well. And then the third and fourth stations, or excuse me, the fourth and fifth stations, we call them visual preference stations. And so what we like to do is we like to show a lot of different types of visual images from different developments or different businesses, and just to get people's thoughts on, do you like this? Do you not like this? Right? We're not saying anything's coming into the town of Lewisboro or not coming. What we're just getting is visual preference survey, because at some point in time throughout this process, there will be a discussion, just like we were talking about vacant lands. If some of those vacant lands were to be developed, what do people want to see? Do they want to see single family homes? And what kind of single family homes? Because there can be a single family home as something small like a Cape Cod, or you could have a mansion, right? So it's a lot of this is visual preferences and what people want, because then we can also look in the zoning to see if the zoning would allow for those visual preferences, or does the zoning also allow to some extent a situation where there's like what the town would consider like overdevelopment of a particular area. So these are things that we're able to get some sort of solicit feedback. And so we would provide you ahead of time our thoughts on the visual preference survey. You could give us your feedback, and then we would work with you to identify what would be presented. And then also the sixth station is what we call, we like to say, is like what is needed in the town, right? So we'll have a list of items that, are the various aspects of like a community, and then also maybe another map for people to also identify throughout the community what they want to see also added to that community. It could be additional parks, it could be preservation, it could be sidewalks, it could be really anything. And so again, it's very open-ended, and then we'll get a sense of what are the community concerns. So that's the in-person workshop. The visual workshop. Go ahead.
Question.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's take the number 3, the statement of
Yes.
vision statement. Is that basically a blank sheet of paper, or is there a straw man up there or something to get them thinking? How does that work?
Right. So we typically will start with like a part of a sentence and then just kind of leave it open. Right. And again, it's, we don't want to bring anybody in any particular direction. So we want to see what people think. Right. So a lot of times it might be, the town of Lewisboro is, and then let people finish that sentence. So it's really is meant to be an open-ended situation where people kind of come up with their own vision. And then once we have a lot of individual visions, we will start pulling it together. And I think a lot of times you will see themes or, a lot of commonality that will come out of those vision statements. Any other questions?
I have a suggestion, actually.
Sure.
On the maps that we were looking at together earlier in the presentation, the zoning maps and the land parcel maps, when we're presenting this for the in-person workshop, I think the maps, it's hard for me living in the community almost 20 years to know where I am and what parcels are which and what zoning is where, to include roadways and some sort of landmarks, I think, on the map, so that people who aren't as familiar with different parts of town could understand where zoning, where the zoning lies, and so that they can get a sense of it better. Because the maps I find it's very hard to interpret. And I know the current zoning map as well. It's just like it's so spread out. And the zoning areas cover such a large area that it's hard to see where one begins and one ends. And it's very hard to orient yourself from the Lewisboro maps. Is the short message that I'm trying to deliver, I guess, with a lot of words attached to that.
Yeah. So right now, that's good. And so I only showed the maps very briefly today, but we do have all the lakes labeled. We do have roads, like the major roads labeled, and we do have the major parks labeled on all the maps. But we will have somebody stationed there because it's very common, especially in larger communities, where people say, I'm used to, I live in Walkabuck, and I want to talk about Walkabuck. So like where in Walkabuck is like, this is where my house is, where would it be in terms of like this watershed, or where would it be in terms of like certain open space? So and you will see, and like, for example, the open space maps will have the open space areas labeled. So we will have somebody there stationed to walk people through the various maps as well, for sure.
Is there any decision about size of the models or the post-ups that you'll use? Because I know, like, even now I'm trying to, and I know I just have a laptop, but the print is like really small. And on those maps, it's small on my computer.
Right.
The in-person meetings are kind of easy. I would assume that things will be much larger.
Yes.
How is that going to translate when you have a Zoom?
Right. So that's the next thing we're going to talk about. So in the in-person meeting, the maps will be about 2 feet by 3 feet. Right. So they'll be easily readable.
Okay.
In terms of the Zoom, so this is where it gets a little bit, this is where it's going to shift a little bit. So in terms of the Zoom, we'll do a quick presentation on the comprehensive plan process, and I'll show just a few maps like I did tonight, because of just what you were saying, Larry. Like it is a lot, right? And there's the details there, and it's difficult. What we will be doing is providing all the maps ahead of time, so that they'll be posted on the website, so that people can take a look at the maps ahead of time as they like. We can also, after the public meeting, work with the town to leave the maps behind, so that people can see them in like the town halls, and in that way, that might be another way. Or if it's like the library or wherever, we'd like to leave the maps so people can actually look at the maps as they see fit. So that's another opportunity. But what we're really going to focus on that evening is not so much as the maps as breakout room discussions. So that way we're going to talk to people about, like, more or less dive a little bit more into the vision statement. We'll do the strengths, opportunity, weaknesses, and threats, and we'll have more of a dialogue with each one of those. So that will take longer to get through that particular exercise. And then we'll talk to people in terms of what is needed in the town. And then what most likely we'll do is follow up with, as part of the online public survey, some of the other questions that were asked during the in-person workshop. We'll probably do those through a public survey. So that way people can take their time and look at maybe some of the individual maps, or look at the like visual preference survey if we decide to move in that direction. So where it's easier to see something more in person or much larger, we'll probably do those more on like surveys, and where we can have like a little bit more of the dialogue or whatever, we're going to bring those to the virtual workshop. So more or less, both workshops will be having the same information. I mean, the important crux of the first workshop is the vision statement, the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, and what is needed in the town, right? Those are the real important things, but the other perks that we can add in for the in-person meeting, or a couple other stations where we can get some additional feedback. Yes, Katie?
I'm just wondering a couple things. So question, can we make the maps interactive? Like, I know like with 1, 2, 3 survey, there is a map and you can put pins in it, but that's just sort of like a regular Google map. Is there a way to make the maps that you showed us tonight like a little more interactive, so that you can zoom in, switch between parcels and landmarks, or like, I don't know if technology exists and is accessible and affordable that can do that.
Well, I think in terms of when you're doing like a workshop online, the difficulty is that I'm sharing the screen, I see 4 people, right? So the other thing is, it's also part of that is trying to have that dialogue in terms of breakout rooms, and then also trying to share a screen, and then people, depending upon if they're looking at their if they're looking at it through their phone. I mean, because I've been on plenty of public meetings where people have their individual phones, they might have a small laptop, maybe, I mean, very few, I mean, some people have like nice desktops where they're looking at stuff, but a lot of times people, I find that they can't, sharing more intricate maps becomes a little bit more problematic.
Right.
So that's where I think
they could see ahead of time and they could prepare by interacting with it.
Right. So we'll be able to have the PDF maps. I mean, I think the only other way is if you start having like online maps, and we'd have to develop like it's a slightly different like kind of platform. I mean, yes, that's possible. We'd have to look into what additional work that would be. The other thing, I think, when we go into the individual hamlet areas, we will be able to zoom in, and we will create maps for those events where it's probably where we'll be able to zoom in a little bit more into the hamlet areas themselves. So where some information might not be picked up on the virtual meeting the first go around, we'll be able to pick that up on the second go around with the individual hamlet areas. Because, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just as an aside, as you start to pick the areas in which you plan to have meetings, you need to consider the internet and the strength of the internet. I just know today in Onitrue, I was trying to download or get some information, and it was not working. I have Verizon, I have the Apple, but whatever, I don't know, just a thought. I know it's not, something you're gonna have to think as you go along, but if you're talking about having folks having a desktop or a phone in the place where you're doing these meetings, and their thought is that they're going to be able to do that, you have to plan for that.
Yeah, so the in-person meeting is going to be, we're not going to use any sort of we won't use any sort of computer equipment. It will just be, basically paper, old fashioned. In the online meetings, that's where I'm assuming people might have their smartphones or laptops or desktops.
My second is more of a thought. I'm just thinking about equity in terms of like keeping the virtual and the in-person meetings closer together in content, so that the data that we're receiving back is complete and isn't skewed to one group or the other. I'm just wondering, in terms of the visual preference stations, I'm just wondering if those fit in the first meeting, or maybe that's something we could come back to in future meetings. And if
Sure,
if
we
we're
can
not
do that.
having them in the virtual, maybe we don't need them in the in-person as well. We can
Yeah,
just
that's
scrap
fine.
them completely.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely
There-
fine.
I don't know what other people's thoughts are on that. That it feels like it might be getting into the weeds too quickly.
Okay.
But I'd love to hear what the rest of the folks on the call think about that. Or if there's
That makes sense. I was just trying to unmute myself.
cool.
I think it makes sense, but in some ways, actually seeing, I know, because I'm looking at all this on my laptop too, and in some ways, seeing a picture in real life, you know, that's might make it a little clearer to those of us who have not spent our entire life on the internet. You know, so I understand what you're saying about trying to keep things parallel, but there might be, I think there are different aspects where some things, I think, as Valerie said, some things are easier done in person and some things might be easier done online.
Mhm. Well, to the question about like preference for residential and preference for business. So our second public meeting, as of now in our outreach plan, we're planning on being mostly in person, but with virtual options. As opposed to this meeting, we're trying to make in person and virtual fully fleshed out. So maybe we just push those sort of things that have to be in person to the next set of meetings.
We can do that. I mean, if you want, like, so, you know, and that's something we'll have to, so we can even have in-person meetings for each one of the hamlet areas. We just have to identify a particular, you know, area to have, you know, or places. But, you know, I was looking, I mean, like any of the firehouses, right? You have three different fire. I mean, those are great community spaces a lot of times to have an event in, you know, so I do think we could easily find spaces for the different hamlet areas if we want to do the hamlet areas in person. You know,
I was more referring to like the public meeting number 2, and then the hamlets are 3 through 8. Like public meeting number 2 would have more in person, even if it's leaving the boards and letting people interact with the boards on their own schedule, potentially. But I was just wondering about jumping right into residential and business preferences. Like
No,
that's really my key question.
one thing I just want to highlight with public meeting number 2, though, is that public meeting number 2 is basically the hamlet areas. The hamlet areas are going to be repeat of the main public meeting number 2.
Oh, okay.
Because really, for the most part, we're going to be asking the same questions, but I think a lot of people want to see them like on the hamlet level. So, you know, we can do, you know, so that's something we can talk about, right? If we want to just have 6 hamlet meetings, we could potentially do that too, as opposed to having the full town meeting. But the reason, the good thing about having a full town meeting is if for some reason somebody wants to weigh in on 3 different hamlets and doesn't want to show up to 3 different hamlet meetings, they can come to the townwide meeting, provide their input, and then that's it. You know, if somebody wants to come to all 6 hamlet meetings, they're more than welcome to do that as well. So that's the benefit of having a townwide meeting and then having the individual. But we are anticipating having similar discussions at all of those, but I think the hamlets will dive much deeper than the townwide meeting. Charlene?
I think the hamlet meetings are extremely important because it's more of a smaller community, so to speak. But we're a town, and I think that has to be recognized. And whether it be at a town meeting and you set the stage for how is the town going to look rather than how individual hamlets are going to look, I think that's, in my opinion, a much better starting point.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people think about hamlets a lot of people don't. A lot of people have other views that aren't Hamlet related. And I think by capturing them on a townwide basis, you'll probably get better interactions on some of those other points. So I agree with Charlene.
Right.
I want to echo what Charlene and John said. I just wanted to share that I'm struggling from the beginning with all the discussion and time and good thought devoted to identifying and corroborating the boundaries of the hamlets and so forth, that I'm concerned that it's just potentially distracting or diluting the greater good of the effort, to the extent that the hamlets, we're a small town with limited resources to begin with, and my concern that by fragmenting the discussion and spending time to isolate the distinctions of the hamlets can dilute or detract or undermine the limited resources and effort we had to codify the benefits of the mission in the town at large, because the town, all the hamlets are going to have to abide by the same guiding principles, laws, legislations, and bodies. We don't have separate wetlands or housing authorities or police departments for the hamlets. So it's sort of interesting, almost anecdotally, but I'm just worried that it creates an artificial distinction that could detract from some of the efficacy of the effort.
And that's a really good point, Mark. And we're careful that, even though we are showing some of how the hamlets break down, this is going to be a townwide plan. And that's why we were thinking, especially in the public meeting number 2, that we have a townwide public meeting, but then we have the same questions asked on the hamlet levels, just so that we can get a little bit more details. I mean, because your town is so large, it will be helpful to some extent if there are particular issues that are hamlet concentrated, or ones that we can say, you know what, we heard in 4 different hamlets this same issue, right? Like I'm hearing about lake water quality, right? That is in all 6 hamlets. But if you don't live in all 6, if you're not used to visiting Vista and you just primarily stay in Golden's Bridge, you might think that issue is isolated to Golden's Bridge and not, townwide. So those are kind of things that we're going to try to bridge those connections throughout the comprehensive plan as well. So, but back to public meeting 1, sorry, we digressed. So I think that was our approach. We can consider moving the visual preference for right now, and then we can bring it up again a little bit later on in the process. And then we'll basically be focused on the vision statement, the strengths, opportunity, weaknesses, what additional needs are there in the community. And it just becomes a very open-ended type of solicitation of public feedback for the first one. And then we have our inventory analysis maps for people to really dive a little bit deeper in. We'll have those posted online so that people can review those ahead of time. And then we'll leave copies of the maps behind for the town so that people can also view them as they see fit. Yes.
Is there a way to work in somehow how have we considered the results from our first survey? So we had almost 800, actually I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but we had somewhere like 800 responses. It was at least something to start with. And obviously I don't think we need to draw any conclusions from that and influence the meeting in any way, but I'm just curious if we've looked back at that and mined it for interesting information.
Sure. So I did take a look at it. That's part of how we came up with the inventory and analysis, for the outline. We also looked at it to make sure that any of the survey questions or the things that we're soliciting information on is different than the initial public survey, especially when we start bringing out our public survey. But it might be a good exercise for the committee just to take a look at the results of the first public survey while we're looking at the additional questions that might go out to the public, as well as the first public meeting. And if there's anything else that rises to your attention that you'd like us to, bring to our attention, we can take a look at it and incorporate any elements into the second or the first public meeting. The other thing we can do, if you want, is we could even have a poster board of like some of the initial results from the first public survey, just so that people, realize that, we're incorporating their thoughts and feedback into the process as well.
That sounds great.
Okay. All right, so are there any other questions on, does this sound like a good approach for the first public meeting? So what we're thinking of, what we'll do is that the next meeting, we'll have a little bit more of a detail of like run a show. We'll hopefully have, we'll have some, like probably boards and stuff just for you to get a sense of what we're going to be asking. And so we'll have that ready to go. And then that way we can also identify how we want to deal with the translation and what we want to translate. And then also we can talk about public notices and getting the information out and really promoting the public meeting. And then I'll also send around some internal dates for the meetings. I'll send out an email. But one of the things I was looking at, if we are going to have a Saturday meeting, I figured that the best weekend to start considering having the public meeting would either be January 21st or January 28th. Those are both Saturdays. You don't have to make a decision now, but that avoids the Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. And it also avoids like the very first weekend back from like the holidays, because I have a feeling that people might be needing to like just deal with stuff at their house after the whirlwind of the holidays. And so I would, my thought was that might not be the best Saturday to have a public meeting, but after a couple weeks after the hubbub of the holidays dies down, then maybe that would be a good opportunity to have a public meeting.
Because it's January, I guess we should have a rain date.
Right.
Better.
We could, right? Or a snow date.
Snow.
We could. It could even be that Sunday, or it could be the following Saturday. We could do either one as well. So I'll send out some dates, and we can, and to Katie, and then she can circulate that amongst the committee. And then the other thought was we'll have right after following, we'll have either, I was looking at Mondays or Thursdays usually are the best dates for me in terms of the virtual meetings.
So those would come after.
Yeah,
Okay.
because again, we'd like to is because it's going to be easier to have many. I mean, we could have upwards to 200 people if we wanted to come through those doors, and it's just a little bit easier. And so my concern is that if we have the virtual meeting first, we're going to have a lot of people that are worried that if they weren't able to register and they have to go to the third meeting, that they're missing something. So if we have the first meeting in person, then the virtual meetings then become options for people who are not able to attend the first meeting or need to attend virtually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also it's better for it to be later because we want to make sure we have enough time. Like we should aim to set the dates between now and the end of November.
Yeah.
And have a goal of getting like a save the date public at the beginning of December. And then there's a lot of coordinating behind the scenes to have the community outreach teams, which are currently grouping and people are sorting into which outreach team they want to be part of. They'll need to be posting the flyers and advertising, and we really, really want to make sure that we get the word out about this, like
right
everywhere and equally across the hamlets and online, in paper. Yeah, we want to make sure we do it right. So we need a lot of time for that. But I think just 2 months, we would have all of December and almost all of January to advertise. Does that feel like that's enough time for people?
As long as we can carry the flyers to all our parties.
Yeah, I think people too much before the holidays are going to be thinking holidays. And I think it's probably, I mean, it's not bad to get a save the date out or anything, but I think we'll have to really focus on the
In
more
January.
in January, really getting people to pay attention.
I agree.
Is that enough time? If we have a whole, like a month leading up to it, do you think that's enough time?
Yeah,
to
I
get-
think,
Prep for it, yeah.
yeah,
It will get lost in December. It just does. It's just a chaotic
Right.
time.
No, of course.
So,
I just mean, if do we need to push it to February so that we have more time to advertise?
oh,
I don't really think so. I think if
So-
there's some, I mean, first of all, I feel like this group has done a good job of sort of getting things on the website, letting people know what's going on. And I think if you do a couple, if you do a save the date and we're talking about a specific date, you know, and then start right after January, start with well, we just saw the Park and Rec, the town clerk web things, emails starting going out.
Yeah.
I think that should be okay.
part of
Yeah,
people.
like, I know that the senior newsletter, you have to have the information into them. They do it once a month and you have to have it into them by the 20th of the month. So there's some timing issues that, you know, for taking advantage of those kinds of things.
So we'd have 1 month there.
Yeah.
But I guess, so the question stands, we will have 2 months, one really intense month. Does that feel right for everybody?
Yes.
Okay. And the goal is, let's definitely set the date by the end of November and get a save the date out the first week of December so that it's out there in public and people can plan on it.
Yes.
I just went and looked at the Katona Lewisboro school calendar, which some of you might know off the back, but it does not look like either date is a problem. Either the 21st or the 28th of January has any school vacation times right around it.
Yeah, we definitely will want to cross-reference with that and with the town calendar and all that stuff. So
Have we decided on a place for the in-person? Because that might be the other
right.
element. If it's at I don't know, at the South Salem Firehouse, is that firehouse available that date? Or, I mean, I don't know what's been discussed, or is it at Onichu? I don't know.
Our options for accessibility purposes are the library or the high school auditorium. The library is probably easier from a planning and logistics standpoint, because the school has a lot of its own stuff going on. Is that match up with what you found, Valerie?
Yeah, I haven't started looking into the accessibility. Well, I was looking at, you know, in terms of, I do think South Salem is a good area, you know, because it's a nice equal distance from anybody coming from Vista and Golden's Bridge. So yeah, we can look into the library. The only thing we have to look at is like the space, but I can call the library and just see, or maybe if Kirsten knows the space that's kind of available, because we want to be able to, especially if for some reason we do have another resurgence of COVID, I'd like people to feel comfortable that even if we have to have, you know what I mean, people could come in with masks or whatever, but it's not that everyone's super crowded within the room.
The other element for the in-person is I actually, in coordinating the volunteers, have some people that have volunteered to do on-site childcare for in-person, and they're credentialed and have background in childcare industry. So in thinking about a space, and you know, we need to coordinate that and actually make sure it's a reality, but we would want to have a space that would have something conducive to that. So the library does feel like a good fit.
Yeah, that's true.
You
The
do need
Lewisboro school where the courtroom is, that's not accessible.
No.
the elementary school, the parking at the library. Do you think you'll get a tons of people at once, or is it going to be traffic coming through? Is that how you have it?
We'll advertise it and specifically make it known that it's going to be clearly, it's like an open house. You know,
Okay.
we'll even call it maybe an open house so people know that they can come anytime during that time period. And so hopefully it'll be just, you know, you do get a little bit of a bump at the very beginning You know,
Right.
people like to, but then after a while, it spreads out.
There is an event at the high school on the 28th. The Science Symposium. I don't know what space it's held in, but
Wow.
just put a pin in that.
Okay.
Yeah, let's, as we're coordinating the date with the goal of by the end of November, we'll coordinate with the potential spaces and if we've missed any options. I know there are private spaces too that I think have been mentioned before, but I think we can start with the public ones first and see if we can make those work.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I just from a parking, listening to Rose's comment about parking, if I would, Lewisboro Elementary does seem like it's a, no step entree. I don't know what other accessibility issues there might be, but that if we could use their courtroom, that's a fairly big space with a lot of parking. Or their gym is harder to get to.
I heard from I believe it was the advisory committee for the disabled, that
Okay.
was a no-go.
All
But
right,
we
thank you.
can
Or
look into it.
elementary?
Yeah.
Ah, I wouldn't have thought that. Wow.
And we can look into that. But that's what I'm remembering.
So the firehouse in South Salem, that has a ramp going up. Does is there a ramp up to there, to the big room?
Yes,
Yeah, okay, I thought so. All right. So that should be, okay.
it's a steep ramp, so maybe that's not a great answer, but
Yeah,
they do have ramp access.
That's where the seniors hold their meetings. So I don't, if it was that much of a no-no, I don't think that would be the place they would go, but.
Yeah, we really want to be by the book
Mm.
in terms of meeting those
Yeah.
those guidelines. So we'll take that offline and figure it out.
Sounds good. All right, so we have one more topic before we're getting close to the end of the meeting. That deals with the survey. So I think we talked about having, starting to send out some survey questions in December. Again, we can decide whether we want to postpone that to January if we think December is going to be too busy for everybody to really pay attention and to really get the word out. But we were thinking of the couple survey questions. I believe I sent those around
Mhm.
and I have them here. Actually, hold on, I apologize. Let me just
I think the survey fatigue is real because
yes.
I sent out to the 130 people who volunteered to help. I sent out a follow-up survey to facilitate organizing everyone into outreach teams. And I'm kind of stuck around like 80 responses now, and it's been a couple weeks. So I did set a deadline. I think that will help, but I think people are busy and they've already done a survey recently, so we might want to space it out a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, I think what we were thinking, let me just show you what I was planning to do in terms of a survey, and I can just I'm going to just share my screen really quickly, and then I can send around maybe survey questions. I mean, we've already seen the survey questions, but we can talk about, if we think December's too soon, then we can plan to do this in January. But the thought was, this is one we have actually going on right now in the town of Hurley, but it's a survey 1, 2, 3, and basically it pulls up a map and you can select. So every one of these triangles here is an entry from somebody. And basically you can select wherever it is on a map that you like. And this is an interactive map. So you can, zoom in as close as you like or as far out as you like. And then you place a dot and then you come down to whatever question we have, you write in your answer and then you submit it and then it gets registered.
Wow.
So this is a nice way of like asking people where in a community, like, you know, you have like, if there's particular issues or things that you really like. And so that's where we were thinking about having questions that were focused on, like, first of all, we'd like to have as part of the whatever survey we do for this is, where do you live in Lewisboro? And we're not asking for specific addresses, but this gives us a sense of, are a lot of people from Lewisboro Hamlet responding to this survey, right? And so therefore, if a lot of the information is around that same area, that's because we know that it's coming from that area of the town. But also, like, identify areas of scenic views and places of distinction. Like, are there places in Lewisboro where recreation is needed, right? Because that can be another point, and then people can write comments. We also wanted to get a sense of like sidewalks. It was something that we've heard a lot about trying to really have more complete streets. We understand that there's a lot of roads that are not going to be able to have sidewalks, but maybe there's very specific areas that, you know, maybe there's a lot of like teenagers or kids that walk in particular areas that we might want to look at potentially identifying for sidewalks, or along state roads, even though the town does not control those roads. If in time those roads get redeveloped, repaved, or there's different development projects along those roads, maybe those could be identified for inclusion of some sidewalks along with coordination with the Department of Transportation. And then the other thought was any open spaces or natural resources that need preservation or additional protection. So those were kind of the thoughts that we had, and those would be different mapping questions. We can reduce the number of those, or we can keep those. And we figured we'd just do a survey 1, 2, 3, where people can kind of go through, make their thoughts known on a map, and then put their comments in and then submit it. So that's what we were thinking of for December, but if we want to push that off to January, that's fine, because then the second set of questions was basically going to be your SWOT, right? It was going to be in conjunction with the first public meeting. So if people weren't able to go to the public meeting, and both in person or virtual, they could still participate and provide feedback on those questions as well.
So I'm not sure, but my sense is if you want to do something in December, it has to be like the first 2 weeks of December, you know, get it out the first week and have it in by the second week. And I don't know how long you usually think about giving people to respond, but if a 2-week window is what you normally would expect, then you can slide it in as long as it's ready to go beginning December. Otherwise, I think anything from mid-December on is really difficult.
I don't think there's any reason to rush to try to get it out
Okay.
so soon,
I agree.
given the survey fatigue potentially.
All right, so then why don't we plan for January? We'll come back in December. We'll finalize the questions then at our December meeting, along with the run of show for the public meeting number 1. And then and we'll go from there.
I really like that interactive map format. I think that's like refreshing. It's not the same survey, click a bubble for a multiple choice question. And keeping it like 1 or 2 question, well, minimum 2, because we do want to know where people live when they're answering the questions. That was feedback from our community outreach teams too, is they want to know who's responding to things. That way they know if they're having success or not at reaching the people in their hamlets. Right. So 2 questions minimum, where do you live? And then another question so that people can just respond to it really quickly. So another thing that I'm noticing with the survey is like people are opening it and looking at it, but they're not responding to it. So if they open it and it's too long and ominous, then we've lost them.
Right. Okay, so we'll go back, we'll reduce it to about like 3 questions total. And then we'll bring it back to the committee, and then we'll have for next meeting also, like I said, the run of show, and then we'll also have a list of outreach that we need to, you know, make sure that we have the outreach groups, as well as whatever emails we need to send out, blasts, you know, we'll make sure we have all those checklists so that we can make sure that everything's being promoted on all facets as possible.
Yeah, I think the sidewalk question is too soon. Not that it shouldn't be asked, but it's too soon because
Okay.
more generic questions in the
Okay.
first survey.
Sure.
Yeah, in general, we'll start broad and then work our way down.
Yeah.
So between now and the next meeting, I do want to keep the momentum rolling on sort of the administrative thing, the coordinating the community outreach teams behind the scenes, and want to get them sort of mobilized soon and aware of the dates so they can start really hitting the ground running in January. We want to look at like what platform we're going to use. Is it constant contact to, like, we've got a 500 person email address list here going, and I'm sure it will grow. All those sort of administrative details. So I'm going to work behind the scenes with Valerie on that, but I just want to see if anybody else, I know that we've kind of designated John as the point person to be working with the senior coordinator, and the focus group that we're going to be doing there. And
Yeah, we're all set up to use their newsletter and their email blasts. So all we have to do is give them input and they're all signed up. So we're good to go.
perfect. Is there anybody else that wants to help with the like behind the scenes administrative stuff? You can let me know, and there's plenty of jobs to divvy up. No pressure at all, but I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that I'm extending the invitation. But yeah, we've all kind of got like bits and pieces of outreach that we will help out with once we're hitting the ground running. But we're really lucky that we have these community outreach team chairs who will be coordinating their volunteers and making sure flyers get hung up and emails get sent out and Facebook posts are made and next door posts are made and all of that. So we want to make sure we get everything up and running so that it's ready in January.
Sounds good. All right.
Any-
I am done my piece of this meeting. I think the rest is you.
Any questions for Valerie before we just take a quick look at action items?
Well, so I guess I do have, we said we would set a date by the end of November, but that's like pretty soon. So is that the steering group, the steering committee that'll get together and do that with Valerie, or how will that happen?
Good question. I'm thinking Valerie and I will take it offline. Kirsten can help, and there's going to be some email traffic, but I guess the first step is location.
Yes.
And then date, because it's dependent on the location. So we just really have to first confirm which locations are an option because of accessibility, and then what's available on those and around those dates.
Yeah, I think the school is the best bet if you can get the school.
Because it's bigger, there's a lot more space.
Yeah.
You mean
And parking.
LES, or you mean the auditorium?
The high school.
Yeah, auditorium.
Okay.
So we'll verify that.
Okay, I just didn't know if we had an assignment here.
I almost like the high school, just because I think that I'm not sure how much traffic communication has been going on with them, if they've been responding or not. And perhaps using one of their facilities might give us more of the, people seeing us and seeing what's happening with the steering committee. Am I wrong, or is that a wrong
Do you have
assessment?
an update on, did you hear back from the school, Valerie?
Yes, I did hear back from the school, and I have information from the school. I mean, basically, we have the, projections, the enrollments. We do have the list of information on what they are going out for bonding for, which is pretty much their needs right now. And in general, the school district has been losing population in total enrollment. So there's not a capacity issue that we have to be concerned with.
Is the school going to charge us if we use their space?
Don't know. We'll find out.
Because they probably will.
I did just get a message that the library can hold like 90 people. So I don't know is that big enough?
I think that would be plenty, yes, because
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
think you're gonna get 90 people all in one shot. You might get 90 people throughout, a couple hours.
Mm-hmm. Do we need to have a bouncer for capacity? Like, please wait 15 minutes and then go in?
We actually did that over because we were working in the town of Carmel and they wanted to have an in-person meeting over COVID. And we actually did have, we had people sign up and then we had somebody kind of like after 2 people left, we said, go ahead on in and it actually worked out well. But yeah, so we can do that. If we need to.
Okay,
But-
so the library is a potential option. Yeah, so we'll make that our project we can work on it tomorrow, Valerie.
Okay, sounds good.
And we'll loop in Kirsten because she knows everybody. Okay, yes, no homework for the committee on that. We'll let you know what we find out. Your homework is to respond to the email promptly when we let you know what the options are. After Thanksgiving. Those are the big action items. The other thing I did just want to thank Mark. He got the Greenway grant submitted. And I know, Mark, you had at least one person you wanted to thank, so I will give you the floor so you can do that.
Oh, well, thank everybody. I mean, Matt, I don't know if Matt's listening in, but Matt Julian is super helpful and he's going to be a great asset back to the town of Lewisboro. So super helpful in, especially in him helping to draft the support letter text for Senator Pete Harcum.
Great.
Yeah, so that was great. And thanks, Valerie, for being immediately available every step along the way to help fill out some of these wonky budget forms. And so you definitely are facile at that. So thank you and Katie for being there to push it forward.
Thank you for your efforts there. We really appreciate it, Mark. And the town appreciates it too, I'm sure. And fingers crossed. I think we covered a lot of our open action items. Did anybody have a question about action items or next steps? Okay, thank you so much, everybody. We're ending a few minutes early. To the public, thank you so much. If you made it to the end of the meeting, you're in this with us and we appreciate your engagement. We're really, really excited about starting the public engagement phase in the new year. And I realized I forgot something. I just need to make a quick motion to approve the October 17 minutes. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, awesome. Did I miss anything else? Okay, we're good. Okay, so I motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in
We have
favor?
a committee
Aye.
member.
Say yes, everybody.
Yes. Good night.
Okay, great.
Good
Thank
night.
you so much. Have a great night, everybody, and happy
Happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. Yep.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving.